So they only got over there about 2 months before I left. I was seeing her, and she was at the airport when I left.
What if everything you thought you knew about Elvis Presley was only half the story? He died at 42, a king without a kingdom, remembered for his voice, his swagger, his rise from poverty to global fame. But in 2025, science revealed something his fans never expected: hidden bloodlines, erased histories, and an identity far more complex than the legend ever allowed. In 2025, nearly 5 decades after Elvis Presley's untimely death at age 42 from an apparent heart attack in Memphis, a groundbreaking discovery shocked the world and forced a re-examination of one of the most iconic figures in American music history. For years, there have been whispers, myths, and speculation about Elvis's true heritage. Questions about where he really came from, what he carried in his blood, and whether the story the world knew about him was complete. That year, a team of scientists and historians, working with advanced DNA technology and genealogical records, finally delivered answers that had long been out of reach. With the help of Presley family members and access to genetic material from Elvis's relatives, particularly on his mother's side, researchers embarked on a multi-year, cross-disciplinary investigation to trace the truth. Their findings unearthed something extraordinary, not scandalous, but deeply human and incredibly significant. For generations, Elvis was hailed as a symbol of the American dream, a poor white boy from Mississippi who skyrocketed to global fame. That image was reinforced by biographies, interviews, and carefully crafted media portrayals. He was marketed as the embodiment of Southern charm, gospel roots, and white rock and roll charisma. But discrepancies had always lingered. Observers noted his unique appearance, his olive-toned skin, prominent cheekbones, and deep, emotive musical delivery that felt rooted in something deeper than imitation. Some chalked it up to musical influence, others to cultural proximity in the segregated South. But more inquisitive voices began to wonder if there was more beneath the surface. Elvis's family history, long believed to be primarily Irish and Scottish, started to show inconsistencies when scrutinized more closely. Common Southern myths like Native American ancestry through a woman named Mourning Dove White, or links to the Melungeon people, a tri-racial Appalachian group, had been circulated for decades. But DNA evidence in 2025 dismantled those legends. Researchers found no genetic ties to Cherokee or Melungeon ancestry. Mourning Dove White, it turned out, was a name with no documentation in any historical record, census data, or tribal affiliation. The myth was not malicious, but rather emblematic of how many Southern families explain away features or heritage they couldn't publicly acknowledge during times of racial tension. Instead, the truth was far more surprising and meaningful. DNA trace on Elvis's maternal side revealed 2 powerful and previously unconfirmed ancestral connections, one Jewish and one African. The Jewish lineage came through the maternal line, which, according to Jewish tradition, defines religious identity. Researchers identified a woman named Nancy Burdine Tackett, an ancestor of Elvis's mother Gladys, who descended from a Lithuanian Jewish family. Though barely mentioned in public records or family lore, this lineage passed directly to Elvis, making him Jewish by both cultural and religious standards. While a few people close to him had hinted at this connection, citing his ownership of a Hebrew Bible and occasional wearing of a Star of David, Elvis never acknowledged it publicly. In the American South of his time, being Jewish often came with stigma and barriers, especially for a public figure marketed as a Southern Christian icon. In the entertainment industry of the 1950s and 60s, such personal truths were often hidden to maintain a marketable image. Even more astounding was the discovery of African ancestry on Elvis's maternal line, traced back to a woman who likely lived in the early 1800s in the American South. Her name has been lost to history, buried under generations of silence and survival, but her DNA persisted, quietly carried through the bloodline and passed on until it reached the king of rock and roll. The amount of African ancestry was small in percentage, but massive in meaning. It redefined the boundaries of Elvis's identity and reframed the debate around his musical influences. For decades, Elvis had been both celebrated and criticized for borrowing from black musical traditions, blues, gospel, rhythm, and blues. Some accused him of cultural appropriation. Others called him a bridge between cultures. But this new revelation blurred the lines between influence and inheritance. Maybe he wasn't just copying the sound of another world. Maybe he was reaching for something already inside him, something ancestral. Perhaps his soulful style, unteachable musical instincts, and deep affinity for black music weren't just learned. They were lived, coded in his very DNA. This doesn't mean Elvis knowingly performed without awareness, but it does suggest a deeper, more authentic connection to the roots of the music he helped popularize. Alongside these revelations, the research uncovered stories previously ignored in official narratives. One traced back to William Presley, Elvis's Irish ancestor who fled County Wicklow in the late 1700s after being attacked and fearing for his life. He and his young son escaped to America, settling first in New Orleans and eventually moving north to Tennessee. His story was one of survival, not prosperity, a narrative of injury, escape, and starting over that rarely made it into the glitzy Elvis biographies. It was a painful but powerful beginning to a family journey that would eventually lead to the birth of the world's most famous entertainer. By the time Elvis was born in Tupelo, Mississippi, his family had been shaped by centuries of hardship, migration, and silent endurance. He came from poverty, from working-class roots, from ancestors who changed names and hid parts of themselves to survive. His mother, Gladys, was his closest bond and emotional anchor, but even she likely didn't know the full truth about their family's hidden heritage. The cultural pressure to conform, to appear white, Christian, and Southern, was too strong in those times. Entire chapters of identity were buried or rewritten to avoid danger or exclusion. This helps explain why Elvis carried such a curious mix of confidence and isolation. On stage, he was electrifying, commanding, magnetic, unforgettable. Offstage, those close to him described a man sometimes distant, haunted by something unnamed. He sought meaning in religion, in philosophy, in books and symbols from multiple faiths. He was known to wear both crosses and stars of David, to read deeply, and to meditate on existential questions. These behaviors were dismissed as eccentricities, but perhaps they were signs of a deeper search, for belonging, for clarity, for the truth of where he came from. He was a man shaped by silences and secrets. And now, in 2025, those silences had finally been broken. The research team that brought this information forward emphasized that this wasn't an effort to rewrite history, but to complete it. Elvis wasn't a fraud or an imposter. He was a mirror of America itself, multiracial, multi-ethnic, filled with contradictions and buried truths. His story reflects a broader American story, one of mixture, migration, resistance, reinvention, and reintegration. In uncovering the layers of his identity, we also uncover how cultural memory is shaped, not just by what is remembered, but by what is forgotten or erased. These revelations complicate, but do not diminish, Elvis's legacy. Instead, they humanize it. They explain his uncanny ability to blend genres, to feel a home in black spirituals and white country ballads, to make millions believe that he belonged to them, because in some way, he did. His ancestry crossed lines that society had drawn to divide. His music defied categories because his very identity did too. For fans, these findings were more than trivia. They added depth to the man behind the legend. Suddenly, his performances felt richer, more rooted in a wider cultural and historical context. When he sang a gospel tune, perhaps it wasn't just appreciation. It was spiritual memory. When he channeled blues, perhaps it wasn't imitation. It was inheritance. The emotion that poured through his voice, the aching, the yearning, the longing, was not just artistic expression. It was a cry from generations past, echoed in rhythm, breath, and sound. For Elvis, music may have been the only safe space to express everything he could never say. In light of this, questions arise. Why did it take so long for this truth to emerge? Why were so many parts of his heritage hidden or forgotten? The answers lie in the culture of fear and conformity that shaped 20th century America, especially in the South. Families had Jewish and African roots to protect themselves from violence, exclusion, and economic ruin. And for someone like Elvis, who was thrust into the spotlight at a young age, whose image was controlled by handlers and industries, there was little room to embrace complexity. It was safer to be the poor white boy who made it big. And so, the deeper parts of his identity stayed in the dark. But DNA doesn't lie. And now, with this new information, the full picture of Elvis Presley, his legacy, his music, his soul, has come into sharper, more honest focus. Ultimately, Elvis's story is not just about fame or music. It's about lineage, memory, silence, and revelation. His journey from Tupelo to Graceland is now seen in the light of centuries of history. The fleeing Irish farmer, the hidden Jewish matriarch, the unnamed African woman whose blood still sings through his voice. These are not just details, they are the chords of the man himself. He was not one thing. He was many, just like America, just like us. And now, finally we know. The 2025 DNA revelation did more than fill in the blanks of Elvis Presley's ancestry. It redefined how we think about legacy itself. It revealed not just the bloodlines of a single man, but the way culture, race, and identity are constantly reshaped by the stories we choose to tell and those we choose to leave out. Elvis wasn't a singular mystery. He was a reflection of millions of Americans with roots that don't fit neatly into any one box. The story of Elvis, now more than ever, mirrors the journey of American families who survived, passed, blended, and redefined themselves across generations. For many fans, the discovery triggered a moment of reckoning. Not disappointment, but awakening. They began to hear his songs differently, as if something buried in the sound was finally being translated. The loneliness in his voice, the ache behind the glamour, the way he made every style, whether blues, gospel, or ballads, feel like it belonged to him, because in some sense, it did. The new knowledge invited listeners to look past the headlines and into the soul of the performer who had long walked between identities he could not publicly name. He was raised in the Deep South, where even whispers of Black or Jewish ancestry could carry devastating consequences. In such an environment, families learn to survive through silence. But silence, while protective, is never neutral. It keeps truths dormant. It splits identities in half. And sometimes it traps even the most celebrated voices in cages of myth. For Elvis, those silences likely create an internal tension, a life spent playing a role too small for the full weight of his lineage. He had the spotlight, but not the freedom to step fully into who he was. As his fame grew, the world clung to an image that was carefully curated. Elvis the All-American boy, Elvis the Southern heartthrob, Elvis the King. But behind the glimmering jumpsuits and iconic moves was a man who had inherited centuries of exile, faith, rhythm, struggle, and searching. It's possible that Elvis sensed all this on some unconscious level. He was drawn to spiritual exploration throughout his life. He kept religious symbols from multiple traditions close to him. Some friends claimed he practiced aspects of Judaism in private. Others recall conversations where Elvis seemed to be wrestling with bigger questions of belonging, purpose, and identity. These weren't just philosophical musings. They were echoes of ancestral displacement. This complexity is especially evident when we look at his relationship with African American music. Elvis didn't just perform blues and gospel. He embodied them. His phrasing, rhythm, vocal slides, and stage presence all drew from traditions rooted in Black culture. In his early years, he would sit outside Black churches in Memphis just to hear the music pour out of their walls. He absorbed it like sunlight. And while critics often accuse him of appropriation, the 2025 findings complicate that narrative. With confirmed African ancestry, Elvis's music becomes less an act of borrowing and more a return to something buried within him. He wasn't just mimicking, he was remembering. The tones of his voice, the way he moved on stage, the emotion he carried, those were not costumes. They were inheritance, passed down through generations that history had tried to forget. It raises another important point. How many people, like Elvis, carry pieces of forgotten or silenced ancestry? The Presley story makes clear that identity in America has always been fluid, often obscured by necessity. For decades, systems of power demanded that people choose sides, white or Black, Christian or Jewish, accepted or rejected. But the truth has always been far messier. DNA doesn't lie, and neither do the emotional echoes we carry from those who came before us. When you strip away the myths, what you find is not loss, but a deeper kind of beauty, one that makes Elvis's achievements more meaningful. He didn't rise in spite of his complex roots. He rose through them. Every note he sang carried a thread of those who came before. The Lithuanian Jewish woman fleeing persecution, the Irish farmer beaten and driven from his homeland, the enslaved or marginalized African woman whose name was erased by time but whose essence endured. All of them, in one way or another, helped shape the man who became the king of rock and roll. This revelation also forces the music industry to reckon with the narratives it has historically promoted. For so long, marketable identity was more important than truthful identity. Artists were reshaped to fit expectations. Blonde when they were brunette, straight when they were not, white when they were mixed. Elvis was far from the only one affected, but his global fame makes his story uniquely powerful. Now that the truth is out, his legacy becomes not just musical, but cultural and historical. He becomes a symbol of resilience, of forgotten roots made visible, of how fame can both illuminate and obscure. For historians, music lovers, and everyday fans alike, this discovery offers a rare second chance. Not to revise the past, but to understand it more fully. It invites us to see Elvis not just as an icon, but as a human being, a mosaic of identities shaped by silence, survival, and sound. His music didn't come from nowhere. It came from hundreds of years of migration, blending belief and buried truth. And that music, because it was made with all that inside, continues to resonate in ways we're only just beginning to understand. In the end, the 2025 DNA findings don't rewrite Elvis's story, they complete it. They add color where there was black and white, harmony where there was only melody. They show us that the man behind the legend was as layered and real as the songs he sang. And maybe, in understanding him more fully, we start to understand ourselves, too. Because in a nation built on mixtures and migrations, no identity is ever simple. No legacy is ever singular. And sometimes, the most powerful truths are the ones that take the longest to find out. Did this change how you see Elvis, or how you think about identity itself? Drop your thoughts in the comments. We'd love to hear your story, too. Hit like, subscribe, and stick around, because more untold truths are coming your way, one legend at a time.